Hello, and welcome to the Tex Mix, brought to you by Texas Signal. My name is Jessica Montoya Coggins, and I'm very excited today to be joined by Bianca Avery.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. So Bianca is the Texas State Coordinator with the Fair Election Center's Campus Vote Project. So we actually at Texas Signal are familiar with y'all. A couple of your redistricting fellows wrote an op-ed for us a couple of weeks ago. But could you tell us a little bit about the Campus Vote Project and what brought you there, Bianca?
So Campus Vote Project, I think you mentioned, we're a subsidiary of the Fair Election Center. And basically in 2012, Campus Vote Project was launched to expand the work and focus around student voting issues. So what we do is we work in a nutshell to normalize and institutionalize student voting by working directly with colleges and universities just really around the country through our programming, student voter guides, state summits. We have a student advisory board and so much more. And really trying to make sure we're working with administrations to make this part of the climate and culture of these institutions, while also pushing forward with the belief that student leaders should really be at the forefront and at the front of a lot of this planning and work being done, that because it impacts them so directly. So how did I get here is I am a
Give us the whole story. We love stories.
I'm trying to nutshell it. So I'm a former, once an educator, I guess I was an educator. So I was an educator for over a decade, before I moved more into really the advocacy and political space. I work a lot with the local Urban League Young Professionals chapter, and I worked on campaigns, initiatives, doing trainings, always trying to increase civic participation, especially in like communities and groups that have historically faced barriers, created to disenfranchise them. So when I was looking, I wanted to make sure I was working with an organization that really also synergized with my beliefs and my passions. And so when I came across Campus Vote Project, I just thought the work that's being done and the way it's being done, in the thoughtful way and strategic way it's being done, just really spoke to my heart. To the point that I even had told them, if y'all don't hire me, I still want to be on mailing lists. I just want to be involved. I want to
that is commitment. In. That is commitment. I will tell you, because there are jobs I have interviewed for where I'm like, if I do not get this job, don't ever contact me. I want this like disappeared.
Yeah, so it was a whole thing. So when they hired me, I was like, oh great. And I felt like I was coming off as a fan in my interview, but I guess I was. So I've been very pleased to work here. I've been working with them now for over a year, since the beginning of 2021. So really happy with the work we're doing and looking forward to continue that, especially in Texas.
Yes. So speaking of Texas, we have had a lot of changes to our election laws. Folks who are longtime listeners and read Texas Signal, y'all have been following our content about Senate Bill 1, which was a voter suppression bill passed in the Texas legislature. Can you kind of give us a rundown about how this has impacted, folks on campuses, students, and everything that y'all have been doing?
Yes, most definitely. Well, again, as you said, so many major changes. We do election law trainings every year and completely as a revamp change and try to make sure that our students are really up to date in understanding what's going on and how it's going to impact them. Everything from changing the times, because a lot of times, we do look, because people work different hours and our students have very unique schedules. So by setting like these minimum and maximum voting hours, banning overnight voting, there's been changes to our vote by mail process, which really has causing a lot of chaos and confusion, even among the election departments, which is where I often tell our fellows and students to say, hey, if you're not sure of something, contact them. They'll let you know the proper information. And there's confusion there about vote by mail and ballots being rejected and why is it rejected? What did I do wrong? Do I have enough time to get this fixed, or am I going to have to, travel to a place I don't live anymore to figure out how to navigate voting? Am I going to get in trouble? So I feel like, especially with our students, the vote by mail provision has been something we've really been watching and trying to help navigate and clarify for them. And additionally, there's also even been fears of, if I do this wrong, like now that I am trying to register voters or talk to voters, what can I do and not do? Am I going to get in trouble? I see some things are now felonies, like being nervous to engage, especially again when they call departments, and even elections departments are unclear. Because just last week they had the town hall call, I believe Senator West set up, and they had so many different party officials, county officials, and there just still seemed to be so much confusion and need for more clarity from the Secretary of State office, which is quite troubling because, early voting starts on Valentine's Day, and we're trying to, not trying to be too punny, but not really feeling the love. So, and I think also when you have groups that historically have either had issues with voting access or have had trouble finding polling locations or navigating. A lot of the students are first-time voters. When someone's coming into that process and it just feels like confusion and chaos and people can't clarify, it's also harder to really push, not how much it's important, but like to turn them into repeat voters, that this is an important thing. This is something you can navigate. Like that first experience is very important when we're trying to really bring our students into this. And there also has been a sense of dismay because it feels like even amongst students that were already engaged, it feels like, we did so much work, we're coming out to vote, our numbers are increasing, and then this happens. Like, and trying to let them know that all the work, their voices, their votes, them coming out is super important. And if anything, then it's just, you just turn up the heat maybe on folks that would rather you be silent. So it's even more important that you continue this wave of this increase in voting and to talk to your peers about why it's important.
Yeah, I can't help but notice, when I was in college, which is, I'm not gonna say how many years ago that was, but I voted by mail, and that never seemed to be a problem at all. And it only seems recently, we're in the midst of as you said, primary season. So I just tuned in very briefly last night. There was a Republican primary, and you had Louis Gohmert, who is a current member of Congress, who is trying to challenge Ken Paxton for in the Republican primary for Attorney General. And he was talking about just seizing these machines in Dallas and talking about all this fraud. And I'm like, where is the evidence of this? There is no evidence for this.
Right. I'm waiting for it. I'm a data research person too. Like, even if something counteracts my thoughts, I'm like, show me the data. I will look at it. Like you, I'm like, still waiting for this data of this massive fights.
Yes. And for college students too, voting already was sort of difficult in Texas, especially when it came to ID requirements. We've known that that student ID was an acceptable form of identification, as well as just registering to vote. You do need that sort of actual physical piece of paper, which is very different than many other states. I lived in New York City, and when I went to register to vote there, it took, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes. And so you have been working with a number of students. What has kind of, and I know that you were just talking about sort of like, we've got to do all this now. How have you sort of seen just sort of how the students have been reacting to what has transpired this last year?
It has been both. Two things can happen at once, right? So it's been both frustrating, but in a way very enlightening and illuminating, because I'll go into meetings with students trying to help them ideate and plan and go through what they need to do, the information, trying to get through the rush of even false information out there, or information, like you said, like that's what college campuses are so unique, right? Because we don't just have in-state students. So we do have students that are coming from places that they are sometimes under the false impression of, I could just register online, or I can just go the day before, or I can just, and it's like, not in Texas. So it's trying to make sure that is out there, navigating the ID situation, because people can register with a gun license, but not with their university issued IDs that still go through a process, But really talking to them, but on the flip side of it, it brings me so much joy because the level of passion and just excitement and creative spirit that students bring to, like, okay, this is what's going on. This is how we'll get around it. This is, students relate to this, students relate to that. Why don't we try this new thing? Why don't, like, it's letting it just, I like to think that I'm still somewhat young, at least at heart, but yet their passion and energy just blows me away to sit and just come to meetings just saying, like, with redistricting, as we said with our two fellows, but like, we have young people, young students, the same students that a lot of times there's a false narrative that, students don't care, they're apathetic, young people don't do this and that. But yet I'm like, they're writing op-eds, they're leading entire events. We had a Texas Voting Summit that was so student-led. Every single panel, every single moderator, every single person that, like, introduced other people they were all students, coming up with the questions, coming up with the plans, writing these full voting plans for their campuses of what they're going to do, testifying to the, like, there was no, when I went to Texas A&M, y'all guess how many years ago, we'll leave it there. And I just was like, I can't imagine for myself, I couldn't imagine just walking up and giving a testimony before my state legislature then. And they are doing this. They're approaching us. Like, we're not always asking, like, hey, can you do this? There are students that are message and are like, hey, I want to speak at this. How do I sign up? I have some friends that are interested too. Can they jump on something real quick so they can learn to do this? Like, they're not stopping. And they won't be silenced despite the many, seems like, pushes and gerrymandering and cutting college campuses in half with voting. They're going to continue to push through. It's an uphill climb. But I do take a lot of solace that, like, our college students are out here just willing to do whatever it takes to get proper information out, to motivate their fellow students, to activate their fellow students to engage, and for them to understand that despite what's going on, for them not to always fall into the partisanship issues of what voting, like what side should own voting. It's like, no, we want everybody, and for me, Campus Vote Project, every student to have access to be able to participate in the democratic process as is their right without extra burdens, without, institutionalized barriers. That's what we're doing. So,
well, and the Fair Election Center, I was going through the website. Yeah. It's a nonpartisan organization, and I was looking through the board, and it was a fair amount of representation on both sides of the aisle. And when you think about it, this should be, and going back to sort of, and we're going to talk about the Voting Rights Act, but when that was under George Bush, there were numerous Republicans that voted to reauthorize that. This should actually be something that should unite both Democrats and Republicans, or if you don't, or independents too.
Yes.
That we should want as many people voting as possible.
Exactly. And it's very interesting. And I can't speak for my fellow state coordinators in other states, but being in Texas, it's amazing. And for some people, mind-boggling when I say how often I have meetings with even institutions like college campus, not even like organizations or election officials. And the whole beginning is just talking about that point to try to say, this is like what we're discussing now is a non-partisan issue. I just want your students to have access and to be able to vote, and for it to be part of the climate and the culture, and for them to understand their rights and to be able to go in and vote. Like, and sometimes it amazes me how often I have to go into that spiel just because it's like, we just want people, we just don't want people to be disenfranchised. It's like I'm waiting. I just try to make it very clear, like that's what we're doing. And especially when we're looking at underrepresented and marginalized communities, which of course we know includes communities of color in our community colleges, and HBCUs also have a vast assortment of just even larger challenges as far as how disenfranchised people have worked to make them. And then college students overall. Again, there are campuses in Texas, and one of our fellows on our site even quotes it, where they were saying they moved from their on-campus apartment to another on-campus apartment, and it completely changed their whole, like their whole ballot, because that campus is cut through the middle to separate the voting and really to dilute their block.
Yeah.
And so those are just things that are just mind-boggling. And like you said, Fair Election Center has been around. They're a national, non-partisan voting rights and basically election reform organization, just to remove barriers to registration and voting. Simple as that.
Yeah, the op-ed from the redistricting fellows, it really struck me. I myself, I actually did not move, but all of my ballot has changed. So I'm in a new congressional district. I'm in a new state Senate district. I'm in a new state House district. There's not really a question for that. I'm just like, what the heck? How did this happen? I literally moved nowhere, and somehow the gerrymandering affected me.
And one of our events that we hosted with an organization out of Tufts that does a lot of that, because again, data and research, like I try to always be backed, and look into these things. But one of the things they were saying they found is, like, again, the larger the student community, the greater likelihood that it was getting gerrymandered at congressional and state house levels. And that's cross country, not even just in Texas. And like, especially they know, is the larger the minority student population, the higher the likelihood that at congressional level, it has been split in half or cut in ways that are very interesting. I mean, I always tell people Texas is a good example when they just look at lines. I'm like, do you want to see some interesting, we'll call it, lines? Like, you should make a puzzle out of it. You would be at your table all day trying to figure this thing out.
Yeah, we were, I was coming up with trying to look at my new state house district. It kind of almost looks like a genie wearing a top hat. It does like this weird sort of shape now. And so, yeah, we've been trying to do that. One thing I did, so you were talking about talking with other state coordinators. In Texas, traditionally, a lot of our legislation will get fanned out to other states. So have you found that around the country, people are paying attention to what happens? Yes,
big time. Especially in the little, I'll say trifecta, even though we're not right next to each other, of Texas, Georgia, and Florida. It almost seems like anything you can do, I can do. I don't know if we want to say better, but like we've had coordinators, like, we share stories and we see things going on. And when this battle was happening in Texas, there were a lot of eyes, because they were just saying, as with many policy issues, but with voting, they were like, there are particular states and particular legislators that if they see what Texas is doing or what Texas has maybe been able to push through, they're like, they basically follow suit, especially in states that have representation by people that seem to be more leaning into these voting restrictions or screaming fraud allegations without being backed up. So unfortunately, while I would love for us to be a shining star to lead change, and when positive changes happen here, due to a lot of times people on the ground, students, organizers, and whatnot, it also inspires others in those states that they can do it in Texas, we can do it here. But the reverse does happen too, unfortunately, where when something I view as negative, at least as far as voting rights happens, sometimes you can see other states crafting their own legislation, or you can even read stories where they'll say similar to a bill in Texas that, like, and so that is tough. And that is something we talk amongst each other on national levels. We have calls where we're sharing what's going on in all of our states. And if it's not happening in one of their states, they do a lot of times will ask, can you tell me more about this bill that did make it through in Texas, or what's happening in Florida right now, because they know how that sometimes can happen.
So there was voting rights legislation that was sort of making its way through Washington, D.C. It passed the United States House on a
Yeah.
strict party line vote, and then in the Senate, it died with the filibuster. Now, I do want to point out that even though there were those two Democrats, Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kirsten Sinema from Arizona, who were, opposed to changing the filibuster, there's still no Republican who voted for that. So what is kind of how have in the wake of that, how has the Campus Vote Project started to sort of recalibrate messaging or how y'all are approaching elections now?
Yeah. So one of the things that we also bring up when we look is we also try to look at like how there are trajectories and there's separate trajectories that this country is on, because there are actually many states, not our own that we're in, but many states that actually are trying to expand access to voting or giving communities an equitable voice in democracy. But it's these faction of states that honestly fueled by, we'll just say white supremacy and also like power hoarding, like that are aggressively pursuing voter suppression. So what we try to make sure we do is that students understand the full history and trajectory of what's going on, that there are alternate paths. There are many ways that we are part of an election center. So we're working on our side with giving students the knowledge, the tools, the resources, and strategy of how we can have an impact, both navigating within the current laws that have passed so they know what they are, but also how can we look forward facing to future legislators, how can we have an impact, and maybe how do we get these things changed, or at least try to. But at the same time, we also have our Fair Election Center that actually is paying attention to more the legal side, that I don't work on that side, but paying attention to more the legal side of where are their challenges, where are there things we can do in the meantime. But we're just doing everything we can in the short term to make sure students have the information and resources to overcome the intentional voter suppression pitfalls that have been put in their path, to try to make sure that we are voting. We're in midterms now, and voting for and looking at people's records, looking at where they stand, no matter what letter is behind their name, as you brought up, where do they stand on this issue? How are they willing to fight for this issue to make it push and make sure their votes are heard when you're voting for all the way up and down the ballot, when we're voting for our next Congress people, our next senators, our state reps, our state senators, and even your local officials, and just letting them know there are ways about that. And also continuing to put multiple avenues of just continue to, sometimes people are like, it's like, no, just keep shouting louder. Let's continue these op-eds. Let's continue to make these pressure points and these points where people will have to listen, where we're still going to continue to do testimonies. We're still going to continue to follow these new bills. And again, hold officials accountable. Like, let them know, like every single day, every vote, every speech, everything you do, I'm of the impression that you should be always working to maintain your job. It's not so much a threat, it's an accountability promise. If you're in these seats of power, what are you doing with that? Are you trying to marginalize the voices of people to hold on to it? Are you fighting to expand voting? What was your vote? What was your reason? Like, don't let this fade away. Don't let it be like a media point that, oh, it was hot when the vote came out, and then 3 months later, it's like, oh, business as usual. Like, keep the pressure going.
Yeah, legislators work for us, not the other way.
Yes, and there's fundamentally seemed to be this flip. I know, especially in Texas, almost like once you're in the seat, it's your seat until you go, and that's not how this should work. And just continuing to work and encourage our students that we're going to continue to work and we're going to continue to push, and that us as Campus Vote Project are going to continue to be a support, a resource, a sounding board, and do whatever we can, that if there's a door that we can get into that they didn't answer a student, then we're not going to just sit in those seats and ignore the folks that are like up front. We're going to make sure to elevate student voices and put them in places and opportunities where they know they're being heard and they're sharing their experiences and their thoughts. Because again, as you just said, really the people, the power is in the people, the power is in the vote, and people need to make sure they understand that, leverage that, and use it wisely.
Mhm. So for a student who arrives on a college or community college campus in Texas, how can they get involved with the Campus Vote project?
I am glad you asked. So we are present on many campuses, but Texas has a lot of campuses. So one way they could go is definitely is checking with their student affairs or wherever their student organizations are housed to see if Campus Vote Project is on their campus. Another quick way is they can email me. So, and I don't know how this works, but I will just share it if you don't mind. So I am just B Avery, which is one word, at campusvoteproject.org. All this can also be found on our website. My whole bio, they can click on me, email me, let me know. And if we are not already on their campus or working with their campus, I should say, there have been times where due to a student reach out or a staff member that's come to something and they want to get their campus involved, they can reach out to me and we can connect with their campuses to just see how we can be a resource through our fellowship program where we actually pay student democracy fellows stipends at the end of the year, in addition to providing training and resources and opportunities to speak or to learn or to do testimonies, like you said, our op-ed, or some of our redistricting fellows did, as well as something that we call the Voter Friendly Campus Program, where we work with campuses on an institutional level. We were talking about like admins, faculty, students, and organizations to create really a campus voting plan of what they will do throughout the year, not just during election time, but 365, like all year, to make sure they're engaging. They're basically growing a culture of civic engagement and really putting the atmosphere where students know their voices are valued and is desired and wanting for them to lean in, to vote, to engage, and to speak up. So.
So we are in the midst of voting imminently for
Yes.
our elections. Is there anything that you really want folks just to understand about what the Campus Vote Project is doing right now, or things that people should be aware of as they get ready to cast their ballots?
Really, just like, this is our vote. This is our communities. This is extraordinarily important time. All times are important, right? But we know there are so many issues. I know some people are focused on one issue or another. Some people are focused on so many. Some people are unsure of how they all connect to our lives. But it is very important for us to lean in and make sure that we are voting, and we are voting in the upcoming elections, which are going to select who is on the November ballot. But also, there are places, different municipal elections that are coming up, like go all the way up and down your ballot. Find out if you don't know what any of these positions mean, and reach out. Again, you can reach out to, I don't mind getting emails about that. It doesn't even have to be about him. If it's about that, feel free to reach out, and just really don't let what's going on or what has happened with SB1, with all the different moving pieces with the voting rights legislation. Don't let that prevent you from leaning in and participating. Don't allow someone else to silence your voice. Make sure that you are still participating. Don't allow the noise to do that. Find information. It is out there. I know it's confusing, but we will push through. We will get this done. And sometimes, change has happened overnight. And historically, if you look at any movement or any changes that now are like fundamentally or historic, or that have happened throughout the years, from the women's vote to African Americans getting the right to vote, to everything, even students voting age coming to 18, like all these things, none of these things happen overnight. They might sound like a blurb in a history book, but these were incremental steps of people continuing to push, continuing to vote, continuing to spread knowledge, and continuing to just work to make that outcome. Now, am I tired of waiting? Of course. So I'm not saying to wait, but I'm saying don't give up. and continue to engage and continue to make sure your vote is heard. And my last thing to students that I say to everybody pretty much is, if voting was not important, there wouldn't be so much pushback, so many fights, and so many barriers being attempted to be put up to prevent you from doing it. So that alone should show you the power that your vote has, and you need to utilize that power. Don't let anyone take it from you.
That is absolutely a great call to action there. And you just tied our conversation up beautifully. Again, my thanks to Bianca Avery, the Texas State Coordinator for the Campus Vote Project. Thank you so much for listening to the Tex Mix brought by the Texas Signal. And you can catch us. We're on Apple, we're on Google, we're on Anchor. We're technically still on Spotify, although that might change. I'll just we'll see. But again, thank you so much, Bianca.
All right, thank you so much for having me.